themselves, I think, so you'd have to say we're failing on this, That doesn't mean that things aren't getting better, and there is some light at the end of the tunnel in certain areas, but you'd have to say in general, we're failing. And I know in my team, it's frustrating as well. There's a sense of frustration with the progress, because at some level we feel that we've done all the things we were supposed to do, we've tried the programs, we've adopted flexible working, we've got the targets and things, and they're working at a glacial pace. And there is, I can only speak for ANZ data, there is improvement, but we all wish that it was more. And so I think my experience is the heart is there, people want to do the right thing, we have passionate, meaningful conversations about it, and it's real to everybody. We're all looking for better ideas and answers, and we're all perfectly happy to try things out, but the feedback loop isn't great in terms of actually pointing to success. Having said that, and we can talk about it later, there are a few things that we have done that we really think are making a difference, and it's little things like taking out masculine language from our job adverts. I mean, it just didn't occur to us that some of the adverts were read with a gender bias. So being really deliberate about that, just taking away that scene. Men still apply at the same rate, but suddenly there's been a jump of women applying for those same jobs because of that simple little thing. Changing the way that we interview people, making sure that we always have women on those selection panels. So there's a lot of little steps like that are absolutely having a difference in our stats. But we're always looking for better ideas.
Yep.
And second, I'm a bit of a provocateur, as I was saying to Lance earlier. So as I was listening to Shane, he talked about this glacial pace of change, and I sort of thought, icebergs are melting faster, candidly. So I'm really unhappy with the rate of change that we are seeing. And I agree, it's not about a lack of activity, but that activity is not manifesting itself in the outcomes that I think we all want to see, men and women. So I go, what's the disconnect? What is occurring inside the fabric of our organisation or our culture that is stopping that occurring? And it's what they call, I guess, a wicked problem. It's not going to be one thing we have to do to change it. It is going to be, how do we help redesign a system that has been built over hundreds of years that has regretfully, or even naturally, I guess not even regretfully, just bias built into it. So my observation after 25, 26 years in tech and 10 months in financial services is there is a level of frustration, I guess, across both industries. What I have seen maybe a little bit more outside in tech is a stronger level of drive and just relentlessness, I think, to try, fail and do more things. And I think maybe that's just the culture of technology, by the way. Those companies are just used to candidly failing more. That's what happens in tech. But what I've seen, I guess, in the last 10 months, certainly working at Suncorp, is interesting enough, our CEO, Michael Cameron, has 5 sons, but he's one of the most passionate advocates of gender diversity. Half his team is at the leadership team is female, and we have over 50% representation. But still, we see the challenge in the middle that I think we've all referenced, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the things we'll talk about, but I see it, and quite often, I will be honest, I go to a room and I'm still the only woman in that room.
There's a lot that's different, but there's a lot that's the same, and so many of these entrenched issues are the same no matter where you go, and I think a lot of it has to do with the framework through which we see things and experience things, but it's about a cultural change. Horizon, though, talking specifically about that, was, I've often said, the quintessential male-dominated industry, 150 years old. But it also shows what can be done. At the time of privatisation, female participation rates were less than 10% in that organisation. We increased that by more than 80%. Over the 6 years until I left the company. At its heart, I think this is a cultural issue. It is about the stuff that we've already been talking about. It is about how the blokes in an organisation, in particular, see an organisation. There's lots of parallels with safety that I talk about, in the sense that the biggest thing that will make a difference, in my view, is leadership and belief systems. It is about driving change in culture in an organisation, but more than that, it's about holding people accountable for making change happen. One of the criticisms that I've got about where we, the collectively, are up to in this debate at the moment is we've got all these wonderful programs and fancy posters and all of those sort of things, but there is still this overhang of a view that if we put all this good stuff in place, if we've got the right recruitment policies and the right development policies and the right mentorship policies, you know what, it'll take care of itself over time. You know what, it will not. Until we hold ourselves accountable for making the change that we want in our organisation, we won't get the outcome that we're all here to talk about today.
That's not working, and interesting to hear Shane mention those auditing the language of job advertisements and doing some of those sort of the small win stuff, which I think is really important. And I think we have to do all of that and accept that it is a mainstream business issue, no small challenge. But I don't think a lot of that has been done. I really don't. I don't think it's an insurmountable issue. I think for a long time, possibly people like me maybe didn't help because we would talk about the problem and articulate it a lot. And it almost did get to the point where I think we're all thinking, but we're doing a whole lot of this stuff, but I don't think it's been done seriously and consistently. And I'd agree with Lance, it has to be done over the long term and it has to matter. And we were discussing this before and I was saying same-sex marriage. Isn't it a fascinating shift that we've seen happen in this country, slightly painfully towards the end there? But when the mainstream moves, that's when the norms change. So we, I don't think, as a business community, have really been sold on that, and I think that's why we get constantly asked to restate the business case, which I just think has been a futile experience. The stats are all there, we've got it all, McKinsey's latest studies are all out. Actually, this isn't about logic, and the bottom line is there's a lot of emotion around this. And the other point that I make in the book, there's also an enormous amount of resistance to change and backlash. So there's a lot of fear, there's a sense that men will lose out, that this is not going to be good, there will be more competition. And I don't think, and we discuss this, Lance and I are on an advisory board for the Defence Force, and this is something that comes up all the time there. And by the way, there are 15% women in uniform defence, 15. So, but we still hear constantly that men are worried their jobs are going to be taken. So I think there's a whole lot of that stuff that's under the surface. The stuff about fixing women I don't think has helped. We've spent masses of money on mentoring schemes and what we call the sheep dip approach of shoving women into a course, getting them out the other end and saying everything's fine now. And it isn't, and we have no data to sustain that. No. So we need to look closely.
On is yes, what we've seen in terms, because essentially what we did, for those who don't know, we're in the middle of it, about 4,000 or 5,000 of our people, took them all out of their jobs, rearranged the place and then put everybody back in. And the way that we selected people for the roles was designed to be much more about their capabilities and their future impact rather than what have you done in the past. And so that inevitably leads you to a much more diverse outcome on any basis that you look at. And the facts speak for themselves. That is exactly what happened. So in the new organisation, it is far more diverse in every metric that we can look at. I mean, essentially what we like about this is, at the heart, and people would be familiar with it coming from the tech industry, the idea of these kind of small autonomous teams defining the work that needs to be done and then self-organising is really powerful. And, it's all about capability. People who can collaborate, people who can be creative, people who think ahead, who chip in, who are multi-skilled. Those things shouldn't have any gender bias in them. They naturally don't. In the old days when we'd say, yeah, but have you done the job before? Have you shown me your CV? Those tend to have bias built into them. So yeah, it has opened the whole place up. And again, I think it's really important for us, because the other thing we've done is say, if we're going to win in the world, we have to be really quick at being able to respond to customer needs. In order to be quick, we need to be, thoughtful and work differently, etc., etc. One of the key success factors of a leader will be your ability to attract and retain really great people. And by definition, that's going to be a diverse team. If you can't attract and retain a diverse team, you're probably not going to go very far at ANZ, because that is a lead indicator of success. So by building that in, as you talked about having gender kind of balance in the balanced scorecard, we put that in not because it's nice, or it's a good thing, so we can quote the stats, because we actually do think it's a lead indicator of success, particularly for team leaders.
So ultimately, I'll be very honest, sort of started out of a real estate problem. We were just busting at the seams, and I was starting to look and go, right, do we move, what do we do? And we said, but I'd walk around the office and it was always space, but the managers had an office and individual contributors had their own desk. And I have to be honest, people would come to meetings with me, and because I had the desk and the table in my office, people would come and have a meeting with me. And so I really only saw you if you came into my office or I ran into you into the bathroom, which did exclude part of, obviously, the population, because not everybody used that particular restroom. So I was like, okay, I've got to find out, there's got to be a better way to do this. So we did a lot of research, and we really started, so we think we could drive better collaboration, which we thought was really important. We thought we could enable more flexible work by adopting a mandate, which was, work is a thing you do, not a place you go. And we got to that after sitting in the room, as many leadership teams do, and writing down all the different ways we were going to improve flexible work. And we had this list of like 50 different models. And we're patting ourselves on the back saying, aren't we a clever leadership team? Look, going to go out and give people all this choice. And then somebody said, what if somebody comes up with something that's not on this list? And we looked at each other and we said, do you think we missed something? And we said, yeah, probably. So we ripped the list up and said, why have a list? Because you're just creating a new set of constraints. We threw the list away and said, what works for you can work for us, and work is a thing you do, not a place you go. And if you bring those together, create a physical space to enable that, to enable fluid teams to come together and work in the location to support the tasks that they need to do, to give people the tools to do that. So you cannot ask people to work flexibly and then give them really poor tools that don't support that. You have to role model it. So if I was certainly known in my old job to join a conference call from the car park at my kids' school, because that's where I was in between and using that space really fluidly. So I had an open calendar. Anybody could see my calendar, see where I was. I put all my kids' stuff in there. And encouraged people to be vocal about the choices they made. And I would, my kids were actually probably the best known kids at the company, because they'd often come in with me and I was like, oh yeah, Sophie's in there. And I went, yeah, she's in there. She's got my card buying things down at the cafeteria. So it was really about role modeling. It was around a belief. And I tell you what, it completely changed the culture, because it's really easy for a manager to sit there and go, I can see my team. And you know what? John comes in every morning at 7 and stays to 7. He's a really hard worker, John, 12 hours a day. Susie, she's coming in at 9 and leaving then. And so you start to measure performance by presenteeism. And actually, when you remove that barrier, you really get focused on outcomes. And your hours at a desk, playing solitaire where the boss isn't watching, it doesn't count anymore. And you have to say, with that empowerment comes great accountability, really clear on outcomes, really clear on how we're going to work together to work on that. And it completely changed. It was a huge change to the culture of Microsoft Australia. It was amazing. And that's, I'll say it's the same at Suncorp. Super flexible work practices, very much focused on that same thing. And you can see the difference in how people work there, because they believe in that flexibility, and unlike some of the other statistics, you see that flexibility in men and women.
Yeah, it's interesting you use that. We went through almost the same experience. I remember, it must have been about 4 or 5 years ago when we sort of started flexible working in a big way. So the HR team, with all good intention, defined flexible working in 17-page documents. And I said, there's nobody said the irony of you defining, you're looking at flexibility. Yes. What if it was different? And now where we are to say, with these, and the great thing about the teams is, look, your job is to get the work done. And the first questions we had actually was, how is this going to work? Because the whole agile thing requires teams to get together. How's that going to work with flexibility? And what we said, well, the team has to sort that out.
You work it out.
You figure it out. We went down the path of flexible good, not flexible bad. So part-timers are somehow superior beings to people who like to work full-time. And we said, well, that's not right either. I mean, there are some people who like structured work, who like to come in at 9 and go home at 5, and that's what they like. So the real question we asked our people was, do you feel you are free to define your own level of flexibility? And if you wanted to work part-time, strange hours, whatever, do you think that the bank would support you? So it was really, do I have a belief that the company would support me. And on that, the numbers were way in the 80% something. So people felt they could. But a lot of people do actually like structured work.
Structure.
11 women CEOs in the ASX 200. So the top ranks of our organisations, not just in this sector, are dominated by white middle-aged men. I mean, we know that. We know that's the case. And, you know, while we talk about the changes we've made and so on, we have to look at the evidence, at the outcomes. And at the moment, that has shifted very little. So that 11 out of 200, that's remarkably similar to when I started writing about this nearly 30 years ago. It's a little bit more, not a lot. And women in key management positions, executive positions, around 20%. So there is something that is still not working in this area. And it's great to hear about the agile working and so on, but a lot of the data will still show you that the people who get penalised for accessing flexible work, and in particular part-time work, tend to be overwhelmingly women. And when I say penalised, they are sanctioned to do it, and in fact run into probably less resistance because of their parenting duties, because we still think of women very much around their parenting duties. But in fact, their salaries suffer, and they continue to suffer. They never make up, it compounds over the years. They never make up their status. So yes, they're out for a year, I get it, but they're back for a certain period of time, they upgrade their skills again, they still find that disproportionately they are falling behind. And that data really hasn't shifted. So it's great to hear about agile working and different ways of working, and I know some organisations are doing it. But what is painful is to think about the IT sector and Silicon Valley and what we now know about what's been going on there.
Yeah, but just to push back a little bit on that, so put aside new ways of working. So the data around not parental leave, but the data that we have around part-time workers is there is no pay gap in terms of part-time workers, and there's no disadvantage given to them in terms of progression, in terms of, so if we look at the people who've chosen, whether they're male or female, part-time workers versus full-time, in terms of their pay is the same, for hours worked obviously, adjusted, and their progression in terms of promotion has been the same.
Is that because of the type of role they're in?
Could be.
Because my observation in financial services is where we see high degrees of women in jobs like the contact centre and our stores. And so I see that in that space, and that's where we see a lot more of that part-time occurring, and we have some similar numbers. However, when you get out of some of those roles into the office and the machinery of the business that isn't in those roles, I think you start to see some different things occurring. So I wonder if we sometimes mask our numbers. I mean, we looked at the numbers at the start, you know, we're like 50-50, but if I remove our contact centres and our stores, those numbers do change. I think the challenge about quota is because the myth that comes right alongside it is quota means merit is no longer there. And I think that's BS, okay? And nobody has ever, you know, I'm gonna get in trouble. Luckily my PR team's not here, I hope. So I think we've got to break that myth. Targets don't mean great women aren't getting jobs. And you know what, if we get it wrong once or twice, that's okay. We've got it wrong with men too. It's not the end of the world. We'll keep moving forward. And so we've got to actually decouple those statements and say, actually, what get measures matters. And if we believe that mirroring the market we serve is an important philosophy, not just because it is the right thing to do for equal rights around this agenda, but actually it's business imperative. And we sure don't need any more research on that. There's enough there. We've got to decouple those statements and say, actually, it is time, you know, as businesses, we measure profitability, we measure growth, we measure market share. If we believe in something, putting a target in place and driving for progress to do that is important. What you have to do, though, I think, and that is decouple those myths that come along with it, and make sure that, you know, I think you talked about it, Catherine, before, there is this backlash, there is this underneath, you know, oh, she only got that job because she's a woman, only way to get a promotion is a woman. You know, if I was going to give you all one thing to do leaving this room is when you hear those conversations, stop them there and then. You know, we have to say, actually, because we've made space and created forums to create progress for equality, it doesn't mean we're dropping the bar.
Lance, your thoughts on quotas and targets to get things done?
I agree with Pip, and I think it's absolutely. I've always had a personal issue with quotas. As I give away my age, I spent a lot of time in California in the 80s, and saw the very negative outcome of ill thought through legislative and other quota programs. But there's a lot of semantics here, and as part of what we did, what I believe in, there were a combination of goals that were deliberately set as almost unattainable goals because it goes to this issue of belief systems. But there were targets that became part of the short-term incentive arrangements for all of the management in the organisation, which again goes to the points that Pip was making.
Do remember, this is about social norms as well. So you know what I'm saying. I mean, parents and families, communities, schools, it's multifaceted. But of course we should be looking at all of these things. You know, one doesn't cancel out the other, which is also what I would say about the issue of, are we talking about gender too much? Because we sometimes see this at defence. You know, are we talking about women? Well, no, we are talking about women. We know that there are some unique issues around sexism that are triggered by someone being female and not male, but disability, people from different ethnicities, all of them need to be considered. One doesn't cancel out the other, and I agree with you. I think looking at it at an earlier age would be ideal. It's pretty tough. It's really interesting because then you realise how deeply embedded ideas about biological essentialism are, and that's actually one of the things I looked at in the book. It's just, we think that little girls and little boys are born differently and they have very different brains, and actually most of the neuroscience is showing us that's not the case. So that's also addressed in the documentary. Very interesting. So we need to kind of reframe how we look at those things.
But it raises an important issue too at the point, and because a lot is being done, and I think there's that people getting tired and say, well, it's not working. We can't do it. It's a broader social issue. Any thoughts, Pip, Shane, or Lance on that issue?
No, that is real. That is real issue that gets talked about a lot, certainly at our company. You know, people, as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, I think there is good intent. People are willing to try things. And when you don't get, it's like anything you do. If you don't get reasonably fast feedback that something's working, you start to question whether there's a correlation, and you start to say, look, you know, we talk about this all the time. I'm kind of getting sick of it because whatever we try, nothing's really working. You know, I don't know, you know, so, you know, is that passive resistance, perhaps? Or is it really just frustration? I don't, I'm not an expert, I don't know. But I think, my point is, in my experience, the willingness is still there. Willingness is there from both men and women to try to do the right thing. They're keen to adopt ideas, they're willing to embrace things. I mean, we've seen that through Male Champions of Change, Chief Executive Women, all these kind of organisations. My experience is when somebody stands up and says, hey, we tried this and it seems to be working, other people busily write it all down and go and try.
When I was MD of Microsoft, I was going to my first BCA meeting, Business Council of Australia. I'd just become the MD. I was pretty nervous to go, and at that point there were about 108 members and about 4 of them were women. So I remember getting ready that day, best shoes, best I'm like thinking, okay, you know, I'm going to hang with the icons of Australian industry and I better be sharp today. So I rock up to my first meeting, I go up the escalator, and there is this sea of men, okay? The only woman I could see were pouring the coffee. And I stood there like a fish out of water. I felt like an idiot. Have you heard that imposter moment? So I did what every smart 40-year-old woman does at that moment. I went and hid in the toilets. I'm in the toilets putting on my 20th coat of lipstick, and I thought, I cannot believe I'm 40, I'm hiding in the toilets. What has the world come to? And so I went back out there. I thought, right, I've just got to look for a face. Yeah, somebody I know. And I finally, found somebody. But what I reflect on that moment, it was not 100 men turning their back on me saying, we're trying to exclude Pip Marlow. That is not what occurred. But what didn't occur was an active step. Inclusion is a doing word. You have to do something to make others feel included. So it's okay if I believe in it. It is way more valuable when you do something about your belief. And I think that's the tipping point we're at, is we need more action to make people not like you, male, female, gay, straight, different colour skin, whatever it is, different personalities, thinking styles. You have to do something to make people feel welcome so they can stay and they can flourish in whatever that environment is. So belief needs to go beyond belief to action.
And that
Make it real. If I reflect on Pip's answer to the last question and my own reflection around this, it is about shifting belief systems, and a lot of that is about experience. It's just that we as human beings come with a lot of baggage, a lot of background, a lot of whatever it is. So the more we can make it real for folks, and I think in that context of the frontline supervisors in some of those workshops that I was talking about before, who used to say to me, "Oh heavens, the world will come to an end if we have to have female apprentices. You know, we don't have toilets, we don't have whatever." Fast forward 2 or 3 years when they've actually experienced young, bright, enthusiastic female apprentices in the workforce, and they absolutely swell with pride about the change. And by the by, the women involved have loved the experience of working with these crusty guys. My point simply is we've got to make a difference where we find it.
Shane, what's your message to the audience?
Look, this is something that all big companies struggle with, is about prioritisation, and you've got this list of all these things you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to prioritise, and everybody says, could you please just make it one? Could you just give me 2 things to do because it's really hard? And our answer is no, because it's really hard. And actually, we do have to do all these things. It's not as simple as just picking 1 or 2. And I think the diversity and inclusion aspect, what we need to do is make it an integral part of solving the whole problem, which is to say this isn't something we do when we've run out of time at the meeting or at the end of the day, or when we've got a few spare minutes. It's actually integral to how we become a more responsive company for our customers, how we engage more clearly with the community and understand their expectations of us and behaviours. This is actually an enabler of that. It's not an add-on to the list.
And Catherine, you get to have the last word. What is your call to action?
I think I've been thinking so much about what's been happening over the last year in this space of women's rights more generally, from the marches after the Trump election through to Me Too, the hashtag Me Too, and what was going on there. And I've been saying for years, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I've been saying for years, what we have, what women have is numbers. We are in fact the majority of the Australian population. And I think what's happening now though is that we're joining together. And we're actually making our voices heard, and that's validating our experience. And I think that's a really fundamental shift. So instead of asking us once again to reiterate our case to be treated as equal, I think now that is being heard. And I think that's really fundamental to making this a mainstream business concern.